This is the Red Alert. Civil defense information will be broadcast at 6:40.
West of the Rockies, you're on the air. Hello.
Y2K, how can we prepare?
Stop a few of their machines and radios. Throw them into darkness for a few hours.
We are fighting for our lives. My family must survive.
For 5 years, 1,000 gallons of gas, air filtration, water filtration.
Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada. Streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, and Odyssey. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, share success. I am Toolman Tim. Today is July the 20th, 2023, and this is episode 340 of Workshop Radio. How is everyone out there this week? It's been a great week. I have got so much shit done. It has just been one of those weeks. I love it. We see Byron Roberts and Haas in there. Great to have you. Tonight, we are going to do a deep dive into another edition of our disaster series where we look at kind of a localized disaster, tell the stories, do a historical deep dive, and then hopefully learn some prepping lessons from it. But before we do that, let's dive into the announcements for this evening. First off, it's Thursday, so we cannot forget my good brother Joel Riles from Fortress K9. Just before I went live, I see he's getting ready to unleash, pardon the pun, unleash a new t-shirt on the world. It says something along the lines of, I've taken you off my tourniquet list. Looks rather funny, actually. I can't wait. But give him some support, guys. Give him some love. And if you're looking to get a little kick-ass inspiration, add him to your podcast feed for sure. All right. Number 2, guys. I launched my own Shopify merch store. Everybody kept saying it was about time. So I appreciate the people who've picked stuff up from it yet. But if you're looking, I put a few new items in there this week. We now have the famous white workshop tumbler, the coffee kind of travel mug. We have a black version for Workshop Radio. And we have a whiskey glass with the Workshop Radio logo on it as well. So it's there. Anyway, the link's in the description. But the main thing I wanted to say is there's only 2 sets of silver left. So if somebody's been out there thinking, geez, I want to pick up a set and I haven't done it yet, 2 sets left. I was actually talking to my silver guy today about the very first installment of our Apocalypse Currency set. I don't know what we're going to call it, but it looks like we're going to release them. Probably do 1 a year, 1 ounce coins. Don't know the exact price or anything yet, but we'll get to it. Just love teasing you because it's fun. I'm excited to get that going. And finally, guys, if you're in the Saluda, North Carolina, or you're within a day, Prepper Camp tickets. The pre-sale price, the early bird pricing is available. Go to preppercamp.com. It's going to be the 10th anniversary. It's going to be big. I've been trying to pull as many of my fellow anarchists as I can to come this time. Last time, there was only a couple of us, and we're going to at least triple that amount this time. I cannot wait. It's going to be a great time. So if you're around and you want to hear me talk about preparedness or just sit around and shoot the shit, I will be there. I will have bourbon. My fellow compatriots from the Prepper Broadcast Network, which we're live on there this evening, will be there. And with that, guys, that is the housekeeping out of the way. So, like I said, I hope everyone's had a great week. Shout out to Hunter. I see him in here. He has been busy day and night. So do you guys remember the LA riots? I always joke. I have to, there's a few people in here that kind of get the brunt of my jokes whenever I go live. But, poor Clark. He is a very, very young Gen Z who has his own business. So I was going to say he won't remember the LA riots because he was right around -11 at that time. So, but for me, I just remember them being a story on the news. It was something, it seemed scary because I was 11 years old at the time and I didn't really understand what was going on. And I probably still don't really understand what happened, but I do my best. I've gone back and watched some documentaries over the years. I remember watching a really good one on Netflix with my daughter, Olivia. This would have been maybe 5 years ago. She learned a lot because, of course, she wasn't in this world yet either. But my memory, Hunter says Koreans and a dude getting pulled out of a big rig. Absolutely. I remember the dude getting pulled out of the big rig on the news. I didn't remember the Koreans at the time, but we're going to talk about rooftop Koreans here in a little bit. But my memory was, I remember I was staying at my Aunt Judy's house and just probably overnight hanging out with my cousin Marty. And I looked at her and I said to her, I said, boy, it's been a busy couple of years with the news. And she said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, we had the Gulf War and then the LA riots. I said, and then the house next door to me blew up. And she kind of laughed. And I didn't understand at the time because in my world, you know, the Gulf War, the LA riots, and my next door neighbor killing his wife and then blowing up the house, those were three big news stories. Now, the rest of the world didn't view my local next door neighbor, homicide, suicide situation like I did. But to me, that just kind of puts you into the mindset of where an 11-year-old was. I knew about the LA riots and they were a big deal to me. They were as big a deal to me as a crazy crime happening next door. And that's really the only memories at the time. I've gone back and dove into them and learned more about them as time's gone on. But it was really kind of cool today. So I'm not going to mention the person's name because I didn't get permission to mention their name tonight. But a workshop community member sent me a story, and I'll give you the gist of it. But they were working near LAX at the time of the riots. And I got to say, you guys got to know how much I love you guys as a community, because this kind of stuff just, it amazes me. I go back last year when I was talking about the Phoenix Lights when we were doing the Art Bell show, and somebody in the community messaged me and said, hey, I was living there when those happened. And it's cool that our community is big enough, but still small enough that people are like, feel free to reach out to me. And I always want you to, because I love hearing personal anecdotes that are tied to these kind of scenarios. And so this person worked near LAX. They got sent home early because of the riots. They had to go to the airport to pick up their girlfriend, and said it was a rather hairy drive at the time. The freeway was completely backed up and blocked off, so he had to take surface streets to get around. And when he did, happened to drive by a Radio Shack that was getting looted at the time. So that it gives me, I actually got a few goosebumps on my back. Like, we're talking 31, 32 years ago, and to hear that story firsthand from a fellow workshop delinquent, it was an honor to hear it. Thank you for sharing it. And yeah, it was, it's just, I don't know. Anyway, the kind of stuff that happens, and a few lessons out of just that story. But the main one is, hey, it doesn't take long for freeways and interstates to become blocked up. So, like I said, for those of you, hey, we see Rachel Brown and Letty Lou. Letty Lou says she's looking forward to hearing about the rooftop Koreans with guns as well. Maybe I should have made that a bigger part of this episode tonight, guys. But yeah, I do. You guys know I'm a bit of a nerd for history. I love taking dives into the past. And yeah, I like to look back, because, you know, they always say if you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think it's true. You know, you see some of the things happening today and you realize, you know, it's probably sitting down and looking objectively at some of the more recent historical disasters might help people realize sometimes we're assholes and we shouldn't be acting like this. One more, just a disclaimer, and I don't normally start with disclaimers, but I thought this one was kind of important, because the LA riots, more than the New York blackouts or the Buffalo blizzard or anything like that, the LA riots are one of those stories that get people riled up. Everybody has an opinion on them, and it tends to be one of those things that happens when you're talking about racial issues. So here's the deal. I'm going to do my damnedest to just share the facts objectively. I don't want to come out on an opinion, and I don't want it to come out as these people did something wrong, this person didn't. It's more of, let's look at where the culture was. Let's look at the mindset of the mob and individuals, and let's see what kind of lessons we can pull out of it. So for those who don't know, and those who do, we're going to take a brief trip down memory lane or history, and we're going to give a quick overview of what the hell this story was, because there's going to be people out there listening who are either too young or Well, here's one right now. Backwoods Butcher. Hey, Kyle, great to have you. Somebody who was too young to remember the events. And so we'll take a quick overview of the high points. But March 3rd, 1991. I didn't realize it was an entire year. The incident happened a year before before they ended up going to court in the whole story. But anyway, March 3rd, 91, Rodney King, 25-year-old black man, was pulled over by the LAPD. No matter where you stand on what happened from there, it was excessive violence. They pulled him out and they beat the living shit out of the dude with batons and elbows and kicks. I wrote down what the injuries were, but it was bad. Now, here's the thing. There'd been a lot of stories about police brutality in the LAPD at the time, documented stories. So it was an issue, no matter, again, where you stand on it. But the difference between all the other events that happened and this one was a gentleman named George Holliday happened to have just got a brand new Sony Handycam a couple of days before. He lived nearby where Rodney King was pulled over. He was awoken by, I don't know, some sort of noise or craziness or incident or whatever. And he didn't know what it was. So he woke up. He seen the police had pulled somebody over and he thought, what a great time to test out my new Sony. So what happened is some of the most famous 9 minutes of Handycam footage ever captured. And you got to remember, guys, and most of you know this, but the youngins out there probably don't. This was not the time that every one of us walked around with a 1080p 4K high definition, front and back, 17 cameras to a phone kind of device. Nobody had them. So this was a big deal for the dude. He stood on his balcony and he recorded for 9 minutes of out of focus, blurry footage of the police doing, unfortunately, what the police were going to do. So that was kind of the catalyst. And there was a whole bunch of stuff happening in the background that kind of led to why this was. You guys know when you pressure can, and you're not supposed to do this, but I do this. Once it's reached temperature and time and it's done and you want to cool them down faster, don't do what I do. You pull off that weight on the top and everything just goes like that. Well, that's kind of what happened. This was the event that pulled that weight off the top of the pressure canner. It went to the news, of course. And the news did what the news is always going to do, because if it bleeds, it leads. And this was definitely a story worthy of leading in their mind. And to continue pushing and pushing and pushing with it, they did. So, of course, at this point, beyond all the stories of violence in the LAPD, this was the one they could not ignore no matter what. And so they didn't. They took the 4 cops to court. And April 29th, 1992, after a 3-month trial, a majority white jury acquitted all 4 officers on almost all the charges. And I remember that day. I do. When I started putting notes together, I remember being in school hearing about the verdict. And that was about all I knew at the time. But of course, you got to look back and see the racial tensions and everything that were going on at that time. And that was the event. This, I guess the Rodney King beating and having it recorded was putting the finger on the trigger, and these cops being basically acquitted was the pulling of the trigger. And that is what set off this massive explosion. And the city went to hell for a few days. It was awful. And Haas says, leave it to California. They were not going to go after the cops. The feds did. I remember that. I remember hearing about that a bit. So this led to 6 days of fires, lootings, shootings, and violence. It was miserable. It looked like a third world country war zone when they were done there. And it was it was not a good scenario. So I want to talk about the media's role, but let's talk about the numbers first. So to put this into perspective, and again, why do we do this series? It's not to glorify anything good or bad that happened, but it's to look objectively at incidents from the past, because as we know, history does like to repeat itself, and look for patterns and look at what happened and hopefully learn from it. So 31 years ago today is when, not today, but 31 years ago is when the LA riots happened. 63 deaths were attributed to the riot. That verbiage is very important because probably more like 50 were directly caused by it, and then 10 to 13, depending on the numbers, were influenced to different degrees by it. You know, one was an old lady who stayed at home and had a heart attack because she was so worked up over the riots. One guy had a drug overdose and his house burned down, and they said that was a death attributed to the riots. So the numbers go up and down depending on where you look. But about 50, when I did the deep dive, could be directly attributed to the riots. Well over 1,000 buildings. Again, there were so many buildings destroyed that they couldn't get a solid number, but many, many times more than that were at least damaged. 2,300 people injured, 12,000 people arrested. I found some pictures earlier where there were just dozens of people lying on the ground with zip ties, their hands zip tied behind their back. So, I mean, they were going around and pulling down as many rioters as they could. Haas says, at the time, one of the most destructive events in history. Yeah, so destructive that it was over $1 billion in damages in 1992 dollars. That's a lot of money, guys. Letty remembers pictures of that too. Lasted 6 days from April 29th to May 4th, 1992. Now, to put that into perspective, 63 deaths were attributed to the riots. In LA that year, I had to look it up. I didn't think it would be this high. There were 2,600 homicides in LA. What's that, like about 8 per day or something like that? So 63 deaths attributed to, 50 absolutely caused by it. All an absolute shame, and they shouldn't have happened, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to all of the homicides that were in LA in that 1 year. That's insane. 2,600. I didn't look this year to see what the numbers were. I know they've dropped significantly, but that's a sin, no matter how you slice it. And of course, so we talk about the Rodney King beating by the police. We talk about the gentleman with the Sony Handycam. Again, this is an event that may or may not have happened, but modern technology definitely facilitated what happened here. So you have police pulling somebody over. You have them lay a beating on the dude. You have a guy standing in his underwear on his balcony with the Sony Handycam recording it. And then you have the other pillar of this entire story, and that is the media itself. So what happened? Well, repeated exposure of the footage, constant replay. I remember seeing some of it myself at the time, and it caused outrage and anger amongst people who watched it. And this was particularly in the minority communities at the time, because this was their validation for the beliefs for a long time that police were targeting them. They were racially profiling them. And again, it doesn't matter who you are or where you stand on. You just need to know, you have to look back and think, what did different people groups feel at that time? The media absolutely sensationalized the coverage of the trial. I remember this being the biggest trial coverage until, what's his face? O.J. Simpson came along after that. And they would, Backwoods Butcher says, it doesn't sound that familiar. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that the truth? Yep. And then Haas says, remember the truck driver the rioters took out and beat during the riot? I do. And it was crazy. And So the media, of course, did what media does, and they focused on provocative details, inflammatory language. And you know what? It would probably be even worse today, because back then, you didn't so much have a right and left media. You just had the media doing what the media does. And now you have the media also fanning left versus right, or, one wing versus the other. And again, so they were pushing, the media was pushing big time to get this as a story. And one quote I found here said, some media outlets framed the incident and the protest as black versus white issue rather than the matter. And I really like this line. It said, a lot of media outlets framed the incident and protests as black versus white, rather than a matter of police misconduct and social injustice. This racial framing contributed to a sense of division and animosity between different racial and ethnic groups. So on top of this, you had people who viewed this as an affront to them, and then you had the media behind them with the bellows going, whoo, 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 getting them flames as hot and as high as they could. They were creating a perfect storm for something like this. And then of course, here's the best part, not the best part, but once the riots happened, of course, the media, instead of focusing on where some people were protesting peacefully, they focused, of course, again, if it bleeds, it leads, on the shootings, the beatings, the fire. And so, to put it all into perspective, you had an issue that was finally coming to a head. You had it recorded, and you had it on the 24/7 news cycle being pushed down everybody's throat. The first time in history that really had ever happened. So if you wanted to know why these riots happened, those are kind of the reasons that they happened. So when we do this episode, when we do this series on, I don't know what the disaster series we'll call it. I love to pull out interesting stories to kind of frame it. And then we're going to look at some of the victims of the situation. And if nothing else, we're going to look at them, see what happened, and see what lessons we can learn from it. Because quite often during disasters, if you look at the numbers of people who perished, and you look at the ways that they perish, hopefully lots of people can learn lessons from, if I didn't do that or they didn't do that, they'd still be here being able to talk to us and tell their stories, right? So the very first story I had down here for everybody is rooftop Koreans. Now, if you go to Google and you type in the word rooftop, I love Google autocomplete because it shows something that is a trend. But if you type in the word rooftop into Google, the fourth autocomplete word is Koreans. I don't remember what the rest of them were, but I was quite impressed that from 31 years ago, that term is still being searched on Google today. So what the hell are rooftop Koreans? And it kind of sounds maybe a little inflammatory, but here's the deal. For those who don't know, LA had a massive Korean population, hundreds of thousands, tons of people leaving South Korea at the time, because in the 70s and the 80s, South Korea wasn't the really thriving kind of metropolis that it is today. They moved there looking for the American dream. They settled in, and tons of them became entrepreneurs, opening small businesses and kind of being the backbone of their Koreatown, I believe is what it was called. Their small town, their community within LA. It's kind of the South Central LA. And yeah, Letty Lou says, thank Adam Carolla for keeping the Rooftop Koreans title up and running. That's cool. I'm going to have to go back and listen to some of his episodes. So it became a term. I only heard it a few years ago. I knew of the stories, but the term rooftop Koreans is really kind of in our modern parlance now. But it was a bunch of Korean American store owners and community members who were like, fuck this shit. The popo are not showing up. The police are not coming. Emergency response is not coming whatsoever. We need to defend ourselves and our property. And that's what they did. So the Korean community banded together. They kind of built their own little militia, and they took to the roofs of their buildings, and they stood there with shotgun in hand. And most people say that there was no deaths attributed to the Koreans whatsoever. Just lots of warning shots were fired off, and they did what they needed to do. Now, they didn't completely protect their community, but they did as much as they could. They climbed into the rooftops, they armed themselves, they formed ad hoc watch groups, and they did their best to deter looters and rioters. This one quote I found said, the act of guarding their businesses from the rooftops became a symbol of resistance and self-defense during the riots. Because if you watch that documentary on Netflix, a big portion of what happened was the police letting people down. They had the worst response to the riots. I mean, it got so bad there that, if I remember correctly, they authorized use of the military in Los Angeles because the police just screwed the pooch so bad. Another quote I found said, the term rooftop Koreans has become a cultural reference and remains a significant example of how some communities sought to protect themselves and their business during times of civil unrest. If that's not two words we don't hear all the time today, civil unrest, that's probably one of the, if you live in a city, remember this, but if you live in a city, that's probably one of the largest issues that you may have to deal with in your lifetime. It also highlighted the strained relationship between Korean Americans and other communities in the aftermaths of the riots and led to discussions about race relations and community resilience. But it definitely showed that a community, and again, this was a community on race lines or familial lines. So these were people that already had connections, and they're like, hey, we need to protect our shit. Let's get together. So they armed themselves and they stood watch. Now, again, when we get to the bottom of all of this, there's probably different things. Again, treat it like a hurricane and evacuate, that sort of thing. But if they were stuck there and couldn't leave, they did what they had to do. Rachel says community at its best. And Hunter said it was the Marine Reserves. There's a story about communication with that tale. I'll have to find it, and maybe I'll do a follow-up on it later on, because I always love hearing the interesting stories. But they basically said it was a combination of fear, pride, and stubbornness. They moved to that country. They built these businesses, and damn it, they weren't going to let a bunch of hooligans burn their businesses to the ground for what they saw as absolutely no reason. So they went to the roof and they held guard. Some of them had guns, some of them didn't, but they got together and they did what they needed to do. And like I said, there was not a proven case of a rioter being killed by the Koreans. Only warning shots were fired. Now, this is debated in some areas because I went through probably half of the 63 deaths that happened, and there was one where somebody died by being shot in front of a Korean grocery store. So take that what you will, but there was absolutely zero way to know that. I read the police report, or the police statement, and they said there was like 300 people out front at that moment, and there was no way to know who got shot. So again, they did what they had to do. So again, like I said, I like to look at the victims of the violence, victims of the situation, and unfortunately take a look at how pointless and, more importantly, avoidable most of these deaths were. So I grabbed the story of maybe a half dozen people that perished in the riots, and we'll take a look at what happened. And, with as much honor as we can, we're going to talk about how these probably could have been avoided. And this first one was the second oldest person to die in the riots. This was an Aaron Ratanoff. He was a 68-year-old Caucasian man, and he died May 1st, 92. So toward the tail end, or right in the middle of the riots anyway, in the 11,600 block of Gateway Boulevard. He was strangled to death by a supermarket produce manager in a dispute over corn. Let that sink in, guys. This 68-year-old man breathed his last breath because he went out to get food in a grocery store and got into a fight with a produce manager and was strangled to death. They said he never would have ended up at Bob's Market on Gateway Boulevard in West LA if the store where he normally shopped had remained open during the riots. The produce manager apparently got pissed off at Ratanoff when he dropped some corn on the floor while shopping for vegetables, and the pair got into a tussle. I would call it more than a tussle. That's not funny at all, actually. But so here's the thing, guys. The story that I pulled from this, they framed it as, if he'd have gone to his regular store, he'd have been fine. Well, I'm going to go one further. If he'd have stayed home, he would have been fine. Having, a week's worth of groceries on hand, he would have been fine. Not needing to go out during a fucking riot to buy corn because everybody is absolutely on edge. This dude went out, dropped some corn on the floor, pissed off a produce manager who had probably been dealing with all the shit that day. Doesn't excuse what happened, but I'm just saying, you're in a bad place around bad people who are on as edge as they can be. Stay the hell home. So the next one, this was the oldest lady, the oldest person who died during the riots. This lady's name was Vivian Austin. She was an 87-year-old Black woman. She died May 3rd, Sunday, so right toward the end of the riots, in her home on West 60th Street, and said Austin suffered a fatal heart attack at her home in Harvard Park. So I read a little bit more about that, and she was home, worried sick about the riots going on around her, and she passed away of a massive coronary. Now, she was 87 years old, and, you know, that kind of thing could have happened. So this is one of those that's attributed to the riots, but didn't happen because of the riots, you know? So she was the oldest lady. So I wanted to see, and you're going to, if you look at the list of people who died in this, there's a very strong line of demarcation between Rachel, you are absolutely correct. She said, don't go to stupid places, do stupid things with stupid people. And I have an entire section dedicated to that at the end of today's show, because that is the theme of this entire scenario. So if you look, I looked up the spreadsheet of the 63 victims, and it's sorted by age. And you look at the cause of death for people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 80s. And then you look at the cause of death for the people 20 and down. There's a big difference. So this poor lady, there may have been, you know, she may have gotten worked up over anything and passed away. She was 87 with a bad heart. So lesson here, guys, look out for the elderly in events like this. If you can get out of town, don't forget about your elderly parents or your elderly neighbors, or look out for them, or do what you can, because this poor lady was probably all by herself who knows if she was for sure. But I did read a paragraph from a friend of hers who said she was at home absolutely scared the whole time and eventually just succumbed to her fear. So remember, look out for the elderly, because it ain't going to be long and we're going to be there too. This one was a lady named Betty Jackson. She was a 56-year-old black lady. She died Friday evening, May 1st, 1992, in South Park, while rushing to deliver some barbecue chicken to a friend before the citywide curfew began. The small car that Jackson and her sister was in was struck by a van because the traffic lights were out in the entire area. So what does that tell you? I mean, she was looking out for a friend. She wanted to take a meal to a friend. I get it. But power was out. Street lights are not working. A curfew was about to be enacted again. Don't go out, you know, as much as you think you need to. Stay the hell home. And there's a kind of a theme in this. And I look at this to kind of pull the narrative out of what happened. But again, this lady left to rush. Yeah, Byron Roberts says, keep your ass at home. Yes, 110%. All right, here's another one. Wallace Tope, or Tope, a 54-year-old white man, died November. Okay, this is going to sound weird. He died November 24th, 1993. He had been in a coma since he was assaulted April 30th, 1992. So he went out during the riots, was attacked. I'll tell you the rest of the story here, but he didn't die right away. He sat in a coma for a year and a half, 18 months before he died. That's a miserable way to go. This dude was a street evangelist. He went to a shopping mall at the corner of Western Avenue and Sunset Boulevard, where hundreds of people had gathered to watch looters ransack a Save-On drugstore. There he began to preach, urging the crowd to stop the looting and place their faith in Jesus. As he was preaching, two men began to beat him. When he tried to flee, he fell to the ground, and the men kicked him repeatedly in the head for nearly 3 minutes. He then went into a coma and never woke up. So I'm never going to begrudge somebody for practicing their faith. But what I can say is that if he'd have stayed away from that crowd, he would have lived to see another day. That's the lesson I pulled from this. He wasn't just around it, he went into it. Again, just not a good idea, guys. Somebody can do what they want to do, and I'm not going to begrudge them, but stay the hell away. As Byron Roberts says, keep your ass at home. Lucy Maronian, a 51-year-old white woman, was stabbed to death on Friday, May 1st, 1992, near East New York Drive. Maronian was found stabbed in her home. According to sheriff's investigators, she was killed after confronting a group of teenagers who had been chasing her 14-year-old son and his friend from a nearby intersection. So she went, the way it sounds, her kids were out during the riot. They got into trouble, a group of teenagers started chasing them. The mom went outside to confront them. They either chased her inside and stabbed her, or stabbed her outside and she went in and succumbed to her injuries. Again, keep your ass at home, right? I mean, ideally, you would never be involved or near in a riot to begin with. You would have evacuated ahead of time, but that's not always the situation that can work for some people. But again and again and again, keep your ass at home, keep your ass inside. Don't let your kids out. If the streets are on fire and people are rioting, keep your kids indoors. Simple as that. If your 14-year-old son wants to go out and play with the rioters, you tie his ass down. And yep, home, yes, you're right, Hosser. I didn't mention the armed part. Home and armed. Kind of stay under the radar the best you can until you don't need to anymore. And yeah, Backwoods Butcher said it's like the preacher that went to the Cannibal Island to spread the word of God and got shot with an arrow or a spear. It's true. You know, again, I'm not going to begrudge somebody for doing what they feel like they're called to do, but keep your ass at home and you'd still be alive. Hector Castro, a 49-year-old Latino man, was shot and killed Thursday, April 30th in Koreatown. This was the one. Castro was shot outside a block of retail shops at the corner of Vermont and Leeway Avenues by an unknown gunman during the looting melee. The fatal bullet passed through the Central American immigrant's neck and was never found, authorities said. There was between 150 and 300 people out there rioting at that moment, said LAPD detective. Not only were the Korean merchants shooting their weapons to scare looters off, but possible gang members and looters were shooting at the Koreans to get them out of their stores. Stay home. Don't go out and be involved in a riot, in a looting scenario, right? Here's the next one. Howard Epstein. He was a 49-year-old white man. He was shot and killed on the Thursday of the riots. This is a different one. He'd flown in from his Northern California home to check on his South LA metal manufacturing business. While he was there, or while he was showing up to his business, he was struck in the head by a bullet that apparently came from a pickup truck that had pulled alongside his car. So during this time, he was completely safe in Northern California. And he's like, oh, I'm worried about my business. This is another theme. Worried about his business. So he hopped on a friggin' plane, went into the war zone, and got shot in the head and killed. If he'd have stayed his ass at home, he'd have been okay, right? So here's the theme, guys. And I'm not trying to play down any of these stories at all. I'm not. I mean, they're all tragedies, but they're ones that could have been avoided, right? William Ross, 33-year-old white man, died Friday, May 1st in Koreatown. Ross's body was found inside a market that had been firebombed in the 2800 block of West Street, and he was identified 10 days later through dental records. We all know at this point, right? Byron Roberts, keep your ass at home. Again, if you were at home and you had what you needed, this kind of shit wouldn't happen to you. You wouldn't end up being identified by your teeth 10 days later in a bombed out Korean grocery store, right? So here's the deal, guys. Reading through all of these deaths, you got to know, and this was a theme I found, a not insignificant amount of the deaths were things such as drive-by shootings, stabbings over a drug deal, and that sort of thing. So what ended up happening was the bad people who would already be causing crime, when the mob mentality took over, decided to use it as a cover to continue doing the bad shit they always do. Here's another thing. So these older people died because they left home because they had a reason, right? Every one of them. They thought they had a reason for leaving. Now, people who died in the riots under the age of 21, there was 14 of them. 14 deaths of kids 20 and under. 11 of those 14 were shot and killed while out participating in the riots. 2 more died inside of businesses that were firebombed or burnt to the ground. So 13 of the 14 who died were out participating in the riots and either got shot or burned up in a business. Here's another thing that we don't always. Night, Rachel Brown, always good to have you. Mike from Snail Creek says, I'm seeing a pattern. Me too. And that's why I like digging into history, because we get to find the patterns, right? Because the patterns are there. So keep your ass at home. And importantly, keep your kids' asses at home too, because the people who died, the kids who died were 15, 17, 18, and 20. Now, again, a 20-year-old, maybe you're not going to keep them home, but if my kids are living at home and there's a riot going on, sure as shit, they're staying at home and helping me defend the home, right? So that's what happened. The young ones died participating in the riots, and the old ones died trying to get around or live life despite of the riots. All of which, every single one of those deaths, out of the 63 deaths, I read about half of them, only one wouldn't have been prevented by keeping their ass at home. What were the dangers during this time? We know. I mean, it was fires, it was looting, it was random ass gunshots, it was being caught out after curfew because they had implemented the curfew for those 6 days. It was the fact that, in a man who is much smarter than myself, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Exactly. And those rhymes are what we can learn from, right? You're like, that sounds awfully familiar. I think I heard that story before, or I remember something that sounded awfully similar. What, lack of emergency responder response. It was shitty at the best of times. And when the city became gridlocked from rioters and hooligans, there was no way for most emergency responders to respond if they wanted to. I mean, what do you do when you have 1,000 buildings on fire? Well, more than 1,000 on fire, but 1,000 that burnt to the ground over 6 days. So even if you spread that out, you're looking at 150, 200 buildings burning per day, streets lined with people, police and emergency responders needing to take their life into their own hands to walk out into it. Not going to happen. Here's the thing. Like I said, out of the 63 deaths, I only found one where somebody died by staying their ass in the house. Every other one died because either them or someone else they loved went out of their house, right? That, to me, tells quite the tale. You got a business you're worried about? Let it burn, baby. Let it burn. That's what insurance is for. And I know it sucks, and that says a lot because, I mean, these people were burning businesses. They weren't burning homes. Now, could it have expanded? It might have. It could have. Who knows? I don't know. But here's the deal. You look at these riots, and people didn't burn to death in their homes. They burnt to death in their businesses, or people died in businesses that burnt down. Things can be replaced. Your life can't be, right? So don't sit around and think, I got to fight these crowds off because they're going to burn my business down. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Have a damn good insurance policy, because anybody who says insurance is not a prep, good luck with that, because insurance, roadside assistance, medical care, anything, any of that shit is absolutely a first line of defense prep. And if you don't have it, if you're like, oh, I'm settled, I got an EMP shield, I'm good for an EMP, but I don't have any insurance in case my house burns down, or 1,000 other things, well, you know what? Maybe you ought to think about some of the other things too, because that shit's way more likely. Stay away from crowds, period. Simple, end of story. I mean, now, it doesn't mean don't go to big events or anything. I mean, I went to, the comedy show the other night with 10,000 people there. Now, your brain definitely works differently when you go to events like that. You kind of keep your head on a swivel. Interesting story. People act like assholes at these things. The lineup for the outhouses, there weren't enough, but the lineup was long. It was about a 10-minute wait to get into them. I went up and got in line, and about a minute later, my table mate, we had a couple who was sitting in front of us, and he came over and got in line as well. So by the time I get in, do my business, and come back out, there was probably 15 people between us. He's just about to go in to the porta potty, and as he goes to step in, some drunk dude who's not in line at all comes running like an asshole right down and jumps right in the porta potty in front of him. Didn't wait in line, nothing. And honestly, best case probably should have been just to let the guy do it, but my table mate dude grabbed the guy by the shoulder, pulled him out of the outhouse, and told him, yeah, you're not doing that, buddy. Not here, not now, not ever. And the guy kind of struggled with him for a little bit, and then he took him and threw him. I watched. There was a cop right there who kind of turned her back to it and just let it happen. I was like, oh, okay. But that's the kind of shit you get in crowds, and you got to watch out for it, right? Haas, this is 100%. And I don't care how you look at it. Do not be a Kyle Rittenhouse. Even though he got off legitimately, in parentheses here, he has a lifetime of lawsuits, financial destruction, just defending himself, and could have all been prevented by staying his ass at home. Right. Again, Kyle saw himself on the right side of the law, and he thought he was doing his justice. And it's almost always those 20 and under who they want to go out and be part of some grand thing, but you win every fight that you don't get involved in. Every fight you stay home from, you win, right? So Backwoods says, my wife hates bringing me to the city. I walk around with my head on a swivel. Yeah, me too, all the time. You just try to do your best, pay attention, keep your back to a wall as best you can. I mean, big crowds are big crowds. But yeah, this was kind of not a hairy scenario, but it was just one of those things. If you can stay away from crowds the best you can. Hey there, Ed Celio, good to have you. Said, I remember coming home from work and watching Reginald Denny getting pulled out from his truck and beating mercilessly. I never felt more anger and helplessness in my life. 100% again. You know, the dude was doing his job and he was probably supposed to go to where he was supposed to be. But again, staying away from the crowds, I'd rather lose a job than, get beat to within an inch of my life. I believe he survived. If I'm wrong, somebody correct me on that. But again, his life would have been changed for the worse. It was shitty. It was awful. It upset all of it. Yeah, it was just a bad thing. But like I said, stay away from crowds, 100%. Yeah, Backwoods, I agree. It says possibly carrying something somebody shouldn't. So yeah, I get it. The crowds, they suck. Don't get caught in a crowd the best you can. To me, I look at something like this, and my first thoughts were treat it like a hurricane. Evacuate. If you see the shit happening or starting to happen, get in your car and take your family for a nice little 3 or 4 day vacation. Well, if you don't need to and you need to turn around, great. But if you go and you spend some money on a hotel, well, the kids got to go in the pool and you get to go in the hot tub and nothing happened. But in some instances, you might save somebody's life, right? Don't expect emergency response to show up during civil unrest, because it's not going to. Because here's the deal, and I don't begrudge them for it, but if it's bad enough, emergency responders are going to be looking after their own first. And I don't blame them. My ass would be going home looking after my family too, 110%. So what is the modern equivalent of the LA riots? What is something we could be dealing with ourselves? And like I said, it's those two words that the media loves to throw around, and it's civil unrest. It's something if we don't deal with it, the possibility of it exists, and it seems to happen a lot. And here's the deal. Whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it was the insurrection at the Capitol building, whatever it happened to be, here's the deal. Don't go to stupid places with stupid people and do stupid things, right? Stay away from them. Stay away. Now, here's the one that probably should go without saying. Don't live in a city if you don't have to. There are some people who have to live in a city. And I'm not going to tell you to move. Well, yeah, I am. Get the hell out of the city. They might be nice places to visit on occasion, but they sure as hell aren't real conducive to, civil lifestyle, I guess. But don't live in the city if you can help it. To me, that's the best way. Because when is the last time that there was a story on the news about civil unrest in a 300-person town in Kentucky? Doesn't happen. When's the last time you heard about civil unrest at a Waffle House in Tennessee? Well, I mean, maybe, but I'm just saying, when you live in a small town, civil unrest is, the local farmer throwing cow shit on the windows of City Hall. That's civil unrest. When you live in New York City, civil unrest is tens of thousands of people flipping cars, burning buildings, and killing people. So there's the difference. Which one would you rather? I'd rather have a little cow shit than getting trampled to death in a city, right? But if you do live in a city, again, treat it like a hurricane. Be prepared to board up your home. It might protect you at least a little bit. Have multiple evacuations to get the hell out of Dodge. Evacuation routes. That's what I meant to say. And again, treat it like a hurricane. And remember, when we're prepping, all this stuff bleeds over into other things. So when you prepare for civil unrest, you're also preparing for hurricanes, wildfires, all of this stuff, because the shit's all the same. When you have three points of evacuation and 3 routes to each one of those points of evacuation, you've prepped for almost all of these bad scenarios, right? Mike says, talking about the trucker there, he says, I think he recovered, not sure, but I think he drowned in a pool like 10 years later. Double check. I will look at that. And Backwood says his wife lived in a city and is more used to all the people. Yeah, it is what it is. And Haas says, when you see this video, you'll see how fast shit can go sideways in seconds. I got a story to share with you guys about something that happened to me after here as well. So remember, almost all civil unrest is localized as well, right? So, if you're in a city and the civil unrest is happening there, escaping to the country or to a small town and staying in a hotel for a few days is a great solution to that scenario. Again, how about the guy who went out and needed corn, or the neighbor who didn't have chicken and the lady died delivering barbecue chicken to her? Stock up on the essentials ahead of time. Oh, shit. What are you saying, Tim? A prep that I do anyway that is good for one scenario carries over into a whole bunch of frigging scenarios. Shit, frigging right it is. I get all worked up talking about prepping. It's a great thing. And it's funny how it affects your life for better in almost every bad scenario, right? Have the essentials at home ahead of time so your ass don't need to be out in a Korean grocery store and being identified by your dental records 10 days later because you needed toothpaste, diapers, formula, soap, whatever. It doesn't matter. Don't do it. Be the gray man. Keep a low profile, guys. Do not. I think about this, and I know the lawyer couple, the one that became memes, and everybody, you had to take a stand on where you believed them. Did they do the right thing? Well, they stood out there with guns pointed at rioters. So I get it. I understand why they did it. I'm just thinking my ass would have been way better served to have been out of there long before the rioters ever showed up, because again, they did it. They became a public figurehead. They went to court. They ended up getting off on probation they were lawyers. They didn't lose their law degree, but they had to fight for a long time, and they ended up getting a slap on the wrist because they did the legal thing, but did they do the prudent thing? I don't think so. Again, get the hell out of, either go inside and just keep a low profile, or get the hell out of there to begin with. Now, if they got stuck there, again, are you in the right? Yeah, you can be in the right and still be dead. Here's the deal. You got a gun like that and you got a whole crowd at you, you're going to fend off 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 would-be attackers before they overthrow you, and you're done, right? Because if you just shot their buddy, or especially with a small handgun, you just shot their buddy, they're going to kill you. So keep informed. Like I say, I don't love the news. Do I read the news? Sure, I read the news some. But if you were aware of the cultural temperature of your area in LA in the early 90s, and you knew what was going on, and you all of a sudden seen this story happening, and you're feeling it happen, here's the deal. The day that the verdict was supposed to happen, I think I would have been out of town ahead of time. But stay informed. Know about this shit. Know about what's coming up. Know about what people are talking about. Listen to the predictions. Don't live your life in fear. But for big events like this, try to keep informed the best you can. Now, if you are home, or you need to stay at home, a good camera system is going to help. Security is going to help. A strong fence. Not making yourself look like a target. Stay on the down low. Don't make it look like you're there. Have a what's the word for it? Like a safe room within your home, so that you can retreat to that area and either defend it or stay safe. But again, keep your ass at home. One person died in the LA riots at home. So what does that tell you? One person out of a city of multiple millions of people, right? But like I said, pay attention to the cultural temperature in your area. Know what's going on. If you know that there is, I have a friend in the preparedness community that is consistently going to or talking about going to protests. And this person always says, but it's my duty to get out there and protest something I believe. Sure. And I'm not going to begrudge you, but my ass ain't going there, buddy. I am staying my ass home with my family and building my life. Because here's the deal. You going out there and protesting is not going to change the temperature of the pool and the politician that is passing a law or whatever. You might be absolutely, and man, you can be absolutely pissed off all you want, and you can say that is wrong, wrong, wrong. But putting yourself at in harm's way, to me, never, ever, ever, ever makes sense. So what kind of led up to this? Like I said, pay attention to the cultural temperature. And so leading up to this, a couple of years before this, there were a bunch of high-profile reports of police brutality in and around Los Angeles. The Black and Latino communities were significantly poorer than the white communities in LA at the time. There was a belief, whether founded or unfounded, that the African-American population was being unfairly treated and racially profiled in the area at the time. Then, of course, the event of Rodney King being pulled out of his vehicle and beaten, being caught on camera, the media fanning the flames. And again, like I said, I don't care, and you shouldn't care what you think about these events. It doesn't matter to you whether you think any of these were right or any of these were wrong. They're absolutely just something to look at and say, this is how the masses believe about something right now. This is what the majority believes. This is the group think that is going on. You need to be tapped into that and know, okay, this is a powder keg ready to explode. And if you pay attention to it, well, then you might just be prepared to deal with it. Again, in this instance, bugging in would have been a great idea because you would have been fine. You would have survived. Bugging out would have been even better because you wouldn't have had to put yourself in that position. But only bug out if it's safe. If it already looks like shit's going sideways, then just hide your ass at home, right? Right. Hunter says, right or wrong, we're in the shit. Exactly. So pay attention to it. Know what's going on. Know what the hell's got everybody riled up. And just say, okay, we're going to hunker down or we're going to head for the hills. Snail Creek says the uppers like to divide us, so no one are seeing what they are doing. And it's true. You know, you got people coming from all ends of it. And again, here's the other thing. It really doesn't matter who's fanning the flames. The flames are being fanned. You need to be the person that just looks at the shit and say, it doesn't matter who's causing it, why it's being caused. I just have to deal with the fact that this is the truth right now, and I need to respond to it. So I Googled this because I was like, what would happen if you accidentally got stuck in a riot? So the entire thing we've been talking about is the dumbasses who went out and joined the friggin' riots themselves. Quite a few years ago, we were going to, I believe it's called Canada Place, downtown Edmonton, to get our passport photos and our passports renewed. We went into underground parking. You walk through a tunnel, and then you come to the elevator banks. We went up the elevators to the main floor. It's this big provincial or government building. We step out of the elevator. Everything seems fine. We turn around the corner, and at that exact moment, we are in a mob of protesters. Only time it's ever happened to me in my life. And it was 100%. I mean, could I have avoided it? Maybe. I mean, if I'd have, scanned through the news a bunch before we went there, and I finally found out that this protest might have been planned, but it was just one of those scenarios where my ass, my wife, and I think we had our daughters with us, come up the elevator, out the elevator door, elevators closed behind us. We turn and we're in a crowd of protesters. There was, I do not remember what the protest was about. It was something to do with Native Canadians. I honestly can't remember. And again, it didn't matter to me. The factor mattered at that exact moment that we were in a crowd of people that we didn't know existed, just that instance, just like we were fine. And then we were in a crowd. And so we worked our way to the side and got across to the passport office and just kind of stayed there. And that's what we did. But it was scary. Just that instance, it happened, right? So I looked to find some tips from people who are way smarter than me. And there was an article written by a dude who dealt with crowd management for a long time. And they said, if you end up getting stuck in a riot, You didn't put yourself there. It just happened. The riot developed around you. If you start to, the first thing they said, and this goes without saying, but if you see a riot starting to develop, get your ass out of there. Run in the opposite direction if you can. But if you are in the mob, in the crowd, do not try to go straight horizontal. So if the crowd's moving forward, do not try to go a straight perpendicular 90-degree angle to safety. You do want to get to the outside edges. That's where you need to get in a crowd. But don't try to do it that way, because they said you are absolutely going to get trampled if you do that. So what you need to do is go on a diagonal. It's kind of like when you're trying to swim to the other side of a river that has a bad current. You kind of swim up and over. So if the crowd is moving this way, you want to go diagonally up and over to get out of the crowd. Hopefully nobody ever has to deal with that, but I thought that was a pretty cool tip, because I'd always been told that if you got stuck in a mob like that, you tried to work your way to the side. But they said if you do that, you're going with the flow, but moving your way across, and you're not fighting nearly as much. I'm going to talk about that too. Haas says, what if you're in traffic, like on a freeway? So Philippine Nomad says, I survived the riots of 92. And yeah, exactly. You guys are awesome. Hunter says, go with the flow and drift out. Do not stand out. So first, leave if you can. As soon as you see it developing, run in the other direction if you can't. Number two, if you're in the crowd, go forward and off to the sides on a kind of a 90-degree up and away. That's going to be your path of least resistance. Number three, they said, stay a gray man in the crowd. So obviously don't start chanting something that goes against the group. If you're wearing a shirt that goes against what they say, take your shirt off, turn it inside out, put a jacket on, whatever it is, but don't be a person that they're looking to fight with, because you're just going to pay for it. Mob mentality is absolutely the worst thing you can deal with. And this is what this gentleman talked about. Now, what did they say? Haas says, what if you're in traffic, like on a freeway? And that's exactly what I thought. My ass always said, yep, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put the pedal to the metal and not stop moving. And this dude said, no, it's probably not the best idea. And I get it. I understand. But basically what they said was, you're not going to make it through a crowd of people with a vehicle, no matter how hard you try. All you're going to do is piss a crowd off, attract attention to yourself, which is the last thing you want to do, and you're going to lose some of your cover. Now, a vehicle is great concealment. You know, if you get in a vehicle and you lay down, most of the crowds, in theory, are just going to work their way past them. So what this guy said was, stay in your car, turn your car off if you can, get low, and try to hide, because they said if there is gunfire, it will give you some cover, some protection, not a lot, depending on what kind of arms it is. But they also said your absolute last resort is to evacuate from your vehicle. But the only time you do that is when the crowd is trying to get into your vehicle or your vehicle's on fire. Other than that, your chances in a large group with a vehicle is turn your vehicle off, stay low, and just stay unobtrusive. Try not to attract unneeded attention to yourself. So I thought that was pretty cool. Now, we've all heard Mr. Jack Spirko talk about don't go to stupid places with stupid people and do stupid things. And I thought that was the whole part of the sentence. But I found today, this was credited to a John Farnham. He's a firearms instructor. They call it the rules of stupid. And it adds another point to it. And this was kind of what I wanted to sum up. This was the idea that if there's no other rule, this kind of sums up what happened in the LA riots. And this was a 4-point stupid instead of a 3-point stupid. And it said, do not go to stupid places with stupid people at stupid times to do stupid things. And I think that sums up incredibly, unfortunately, the people who didn't make it through the LA riots, because going to stupid places would be going to a grocery store in the middle of a riot. With stupid people would be going out and being a rioter yourself. At stupid times, well, that could be after curfew. That could be on the street when the signal lights are out and doing stupid things. How about throwing bricks through windows or shooting at rooftop Koreans? That kind of shit's going to get you killed. But I really like that. I said, if there's one lesson, again, it just, to me, I mean, and it's easy for, this late model Gen Xer to sit back and say, yeah, don't go to stupid places with stupid people at stupid times to do stupid things. Well, sure, because I'm usually in bed by 9 o'clock. But it's for the youngins that need to hear this. And it's for the people who have kids who are like, you know what? I got to make sure my kids don't do it, because that's when you're dumb. That's when you end up dead, right? So Mike, our local Filipino nomad, says, keep your radar on and get intel before things heat up to avoid being in the path of the mob in the first place. Absolutely. Yes. He also says, yes, like going to the beach to check out the weird surf during or after an earthquake. Right. Where I grew up in Nova Scotia, there is an iconic lighthouse called Peggy's Cove. And if you've ever seen pictures of Nova Scotia, you've probably seen the Peggy's Cove Lighthouse. And there are signs that say, do not go on the rocks. And every single year, without fail, there is the story of a tourist who went too close to the rocks and stepped on the slippery seaweed and was never seen from again, or the surf splashed up, pulled them in, and was never seen from again. Because they did stupid things in a stupid place. They were the stupid person. But pay attention, guys. Listen to the, take the cultural temperature of the area you're in. If you live in a city, you're wrong. No, that's not true. I don't like to say that, but you're probably better off to get the hell out of a city long before anything bad happens. But if you can't, have routes of egress, figure out ways to get out long beforehand. And if you do live in a city, I would say your bug out, what it takes for you to bug out, is probably going to be a lot shorter than somebody living off in the country. And you're probably going to have some false starts, and you're probably going to have times when you bug out and you didn't need to, but it's going to be worth it. So yeah, I hope you guys like doing these. I do. This is the third one we've done, and I've got a list of probably 25 different events that we can cover over the next few years. I like it. Actually been since March, so we're talking 3 or 4 months since I did one of these episodes. When the weather gets good, everything gets messed up. So winter time is the time that I love doing these deep dives, but it was time to do one of these, and I enjoy them. What do they say? You die. Hey, Hunter, we've got him on YouTube and over on Twitch now. They say you die once when your first death, and then you die a second time when the last person who knows you dies. And that's kind of how I look at these stories. Sharing people's stories is hopefully we're honoring their legacy by going back and seeing these stories, and that we don't become that statistic either. And I hope that those people would be honored to know that somebody's still talking about them and saying, hey, if we look at this and we're not judging them for what they did, but we're going to learn from what they did and we're going to do better. And again, history's fun. History's interesting. To me, it's one of my favorite things to do. And I find it entertaining as well. So yeah, I've got a bunch. If you guys have specific kind of regional disasters, and this is the thing, every one of these disasters are going to be regional, because disasters are typically regional in general. And if they're not, we're in way worse shape. We're in really bad trouble, because all the prepper porn I read, that's when it's a global disaster that we're in trouble, right? But we can learn from these. Yeah. So you guys want to follow up with me, send me some stuff over on Telegram and say, hey, this is an event I'd like you to cover, because I've got a bunch. I think I've got some wildfire ones. There's obviously some more hurricanes, some tornadoes, but it's good for us to do this. And it's an entertaining new spin on old lessons, right? So I appreciate you guys. I love doing these episodes for you. Thursday nights always tend to be my favorite, because they're these deep dives that we do. Coming up tomorrow night will be Mrs. Toolman and myself. Not 100% sure what we're doing yet. I think we might be doing a top 5 movie list episode again, I believe. We haven't done one of those in a while. They're always a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys coming in here and hanging out with me on a Thursday night, because it's summer and this is the time to get shit done. But guys, I appreciate you, and thanks for coming in. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.